We are in week 10 of 11 in our series called Follow, as we have been going through the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke. Luke is writing to Theophilus, and he's trying to describe to Theophilus how this insurrection that began with a simple carpenter has erupted in the ancient world, literally erupted all over the ancient world. And so as a church this summer, we've been going on a journey with Luke to discover this Jesus that Luke is describing, that Luke says that he follows, and Luke says has changed the world. And so we have seen Jesus the man, we have seen Jesus the miracle maker, we have seen Jesus do things that nobody else can do. And honestly, by this week, there should be very little doubt in our minds of who Jesus is and the incredible nature of his character and just the supernatural capacity that he has for others. And yet, at the same time, Luke has been building towards this moment. He's been building really to this week and to next week. These are the two kind of penultimate weeks for the Gospel of Luke. Some of you are here in week 3, and in week 3 we talked about the temptation of Jesus. And some of you will recall in that passage that Satan, after he was done tempting Jesus, looked at him and he said, okay, I'm taking off. And the text says he went to go wait for another opportune time. For chapters and for months and for a couple of years, he has been planning. He has been waiting. He has been doing everything he can do. He's tried to work through the Pharisees. He's thrown a few things in there. Jesus has come across demons, but really Satan hasn't marshaled all of his forces. And by the time that we enter into this text together this morning, Satan has marshaled everything that he has against Jesus, because the text we're going to look at this morning is the crucifixion story. We've been telling the crucifixion story for the last 2 millennia. And it's a story that we get very, very familiar with. Just in the interest of kind of full disclosure, as a young pastor, I had a hard time making it through this text without crying. It wasn't so much the Lucan text as it was the Matthew's gospel, but every time I would go through the crucifixion story, I would think, those were my sins that you died for. It was by the stripes that I put on your back that I am healed. It is me who mocked you, Lord. It is me who participated in all of that. And it would rub raw. The crucifixion would get so close that I would end up weeping as a result of it. For others of you, maybe it's different. Maybe you're a little more distant from it. On 9/11, we lived in Aschaffenburg, Germany, and my mom was actually in the air. And my wife called me. We were getting school supplies for my sons, and she said, you got to get back to the house. And so I went back to the house, and there on the giant box TV, because flat screens weren't around yet, there we were watching the news coverage of the events that were unfolding in New York. Now, I wasn't in New York, but I was watching it kind of from a distance, and you almost got analytical about it. In fact, you realize this is a tragic event. My heart goes out for you. I'm so sorry, but it's just enough at a distance. And maybe that's your experience with the crucifixion, right? It's tragic. You can kind of relate to it. Yes, it seems like it's a big deal, but honestly, it's like something you flip on the TV and you're not really sure kind of how you're supposed to respond to it. Do I analyze it? Do I look at it? What do I do with this thing? And so the challenge for us this morning is, how do we approach a text that has been approached for 2,000 plus years and not turn into a puddling, sobbing mess at the end of it, but also not let it be so distant that it doesn't make its way into our hearts? What do we do with all of this? And so as I was preparing for this message, I was going back through all the Gospels, and I noticed something. I noticed that the crucifixion story actually doesn't read like Mel Gibson's The Passion. Now, it probably went down much like Mel Gibson's The Passion. If you've ever seen that movie, you know there is blood everywhere in that movie. And it's a powerful movie, and it's a way of putting you, inserting you right into the scene. And the truth is, there is blood all over this story. It's gruesome, it's ugly, it's painful, it's all of the things that you think it is and more. And yet, when the gospel writers approach the crucifixion story, they don't so much focus on the length of the nails. How deep were the scars? How long was the lash? Roman law knew absolutely no end to the number of lashes that a prisoner could receive before they got crucified. Jewish law said 40 minus 1. But Romans, they would often beat the person until they died. And by the way, they were embarrassed when they happened, because the idea was to bring the prisoner just above the point of death, just before they would go away. And then they would make sure they just kept them at that point, at that moment, for as long as possible. The goal was suffering. But when you read the gospel authors, it's interesting. They describe some of that, but it's almost in passing. He was whipped, he was mocked, he was beat, he was abused. He walked this way of pain, this way of grief, the Via Dolorosa. But what they focus on is really Jesus' response in the midst of those moments. It's almost as if they're saying it's not just the pressure, it's the grace under pressure that makes this man so remarkable. So if you have your Bibles, turn with me to the book of Luke, chapter 23. Luke chapter 23, we're going to begin in verse 26, and we're going to go to verse 43. Luke chapter 23. We're going to begin with verse 26, and we're going to go to verse 43. Luke, as you would expect, has some things that the other gospel authors don't record. He's been very thorough so far in his gospel account. They've been very detail-oriented. It's one of the things we love about the Gospel of Luke, is that it's so descriptive. And so if you're almost to your iPhone, iPad, Android, Chromebook, whatever it is that you're using, or book, old-fashioned book, won't you stand with me in honor of God's word? Jesus has already been whipped. He's been mocked. He's been beaten. He's been bounced between two kings. And as they led him away, they seized one, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, and laid him on the cross to carry it behind Jesus. And there followed him a great multitude of people and of women who were mourning and lamenting for him. But turning to them, Jesus said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" Two others, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, that's not a description of a bunch of skulls piled up. It's not some sort of a weird cartoon. It's topography, it's geography. The place looked like a skull. There they crucified him, and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And they cast lots to divide his garments, and the people stood by watching. But the ruler scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you'll be with me in paradise." Let's pray. The price that you paid on our behalf is staggering. And we pause just a moment to say thank you as we look back and examine what you did for us. But Father God, this morning I'm asking you for the capacity to step back into this moment, so that perhaps we can see what others saw at the time and what people have seen through millennia, to come to the conclusion that you are in fact worth following. So give us tender hearts and give us ears that are willing to hear, and help us to know what to do about it. In your Son's name, Amen. You may be seated. It's been a really long night for Jesus. It's been a very long night for Jesus. We tend to forget that when we're reading these events, we're actually reading them as they take place in the morning. Jesus is going to be crucified right around 9 a.m. He'll eventually pass away right around 3 p.m. That's a lot of hours to hang on a cross. But just getting to all of that suffering and all of those hours, there was a long road to that, and it happened all night. Jesus has already been before the Sanhedrin. He has already been punched and asked, "Who punched you?" He has already had a crown of thorns pressed upon his head. He has already been mocked by other people. He's been bounced literally from Pilate to Herod. And the text says, Luke tells us, that before this event, Pilate and Herod didn't like each other. But this event, suddenly they liked each other. Why? Because here comes this man before Pilate, and Pilate goes, "Well, I don't want to have anything to do with this. You should go to Herod." They come before Herod. Herod goes, "I'll make fun of you a little bit. I'm going to mock you a little bit. And then you don't rank up to my level. So hands off from me as well." And so two men who actually wind up condemning Jesus to death, pretend not to, and they love their own pretense, and so they wind up liking each other in this process. Jesus is a bloody pulp. By the time we get to this point in the morning, and I have walked the way of grief, I have been down the Via Dolorosa, I know what this looks like. It is crowded, it is small. I can still picture vendors on both sides. It is absolute and utter chaos. People yelling, piling on top of each other to see this Jesus. This is the same Jesus who entered into the city with great fanfare on a donkey. Some of you remember that text. So Jesus, exhausted, is trying to take his cross, and the Roman soldiers recognize he can't even carry a cross. And so there's really three primary characters in this first little passage: Simon of Cyrene, the women, and then Jesus himself, Jesus' response. Simon is from a place called Cyrene. Cyrene is in modern day Libya. It's about 800 miles away. Simon is likely a Jew. He's traveled there, and we know something of Simon because the text, the Gospel of Mark tells us that we know his sons, Alexander and Rufus. Now, Alexander and Rufus, we don't know them because they were great musicians or great actors, or, Alexander and Rufus, those are just two famous guys. We know them because they're actually followers of Jesus. They wind up becoming disciples of Jesus. And in all likelihood, they become disciples of Jesus because their father becomes a follower of Jesus. Their father's name is Simon of Cyrene. And this is the moment where we see Simon's heart get broken. This is the moment where we see Simon get a front row seat to history. Simon's coming in. He comes through the gates. We don't know how long he's been there. It's early morning, so he maybe has stuff to do. The crowd is packed. Some people know what they're doing. Other people, they're not so sure. Some people are just ignorant, right? They're just there to kind of see the show because it's one of yet another series of crucifixions that the Romans will do throughout the centuries. And so the scene is chaotic. The Romans, randomly for them, divinely for God, pick Simon out of a crowd and says, you're going to carry Jesus' cross. And now Simon, think about this with me, who becomes a follower of Jesus. What did Luke say earlier? In order to follow me, you have to take up your cross and follow me. Simon will literally take up the cross of Christ, and Luke is specific, will follow behind Jesus as Jesus marches in front of him. Luke has a front row seat to history. Yes, he's carrying this condemned man's cross, but he's coming in going, well, what's going on? Who is this? What's happening? Maybe he's heard bits and pieces here and there, but he's coming in from Libya, so it's hard to know how much he knows. So he's coming into this thing fairly fresh, and now he's got to carry this cross. It's like an interruption to his day, but there's something about this man in front of him. There's something about this battered, beaten mess of a man in front of him that seems different for him. And so he begins to carry Jesus' cross. Here's what else is interesting. The guilty always carried their own crosses. That was part of the punishment. If you were being crucified, you had to carry your cross. Why? Because you were guilty. It was your cross to bear. Jesus, who is guiltless, the Romans see that he's weak, and so, well, I guess we'll have someone else carry that cross. Do you really think that that's divinely accidental? That out of this one event, one man becomes a follower of Jesus and he bears the guilt that the guiltless man in front of him is supposed to bear. Simon representing really almost all of us, right? Forget almost, all of us who bear the guilt. It was our cross for Jesus to die on. And so Simon will carry this cross behind Jesus and he will see Jesus' response in this moment. There's another group here, and that's the group of women. Now notice the women. This is one of those moments in the story of Jesus where you actually think Jesus is getting a break, right? Because when you read the text, what's it say? It says they were mourning and lamenting this man. And so we think, oh, finally, someone is at least sad for Jesus. Right? Someone at least cares for this guy. Except that if you know Middle Eastern history and you know Middle Eastern culture a little bit, you know that there is a professional set of mourners. These are women who get paid to mourn. Here's the thinking behind it. Even a man condemned to death deserves his last meal. He deserves some show of compassion by his captors. That's how we express that today. What would you like to eat? You're about to die. You're going to go to the electric chair. What would you like? Okay. It's the way of kind of showing we're still human in spite of inflicting this punishment on you. The Jews were no different. They recognized, listen, we need to wail. We need to mourn. This is a human life. Remember, Jewish culture, high value on humanity. That's God-led. That's important. But these were professional mourners. They got paid to mourn. So it really didn't matter who was carrying the cross. There would have been mourners for both of the thieves. There would have been mourners for the others who were crucified. In fact, as much as we think this is a moment of sweetness and of pity and of somehow genuine sorrow or compassion, the truth is this is a very religious moment. Why are you mourning Jesus? Well, it's just what we do. And there he is. And so this is what I do. And it's my way of letting him know, hey, we're still human and we still love God, right? I mean, I show up, I do my thing, and being religious is okay, right? So as long as I follow the law, as long as I do what other people want me to do, as long as I give this man some sort of a show, that will be enough. And yet, it's in the middle of all this that Jesus pauses and turns to speak with them. Now, I want you to think about this with me for just a second, because this is a stunning moment. If I was you, I would actually get out my highlighter and I would highlight this moment. Here's why. Jesus is fully aware of everything that is happening around him. And that's amazing. Have you ever been in a race, or have you ever been in a moment where you were just exhausted mentally, exhausted physically, just at the end of your rope? Remember, Jesus can't carry a cross. Jesus is exhausted. It's been a long night. He's been brought above the point of death and made to suffer for as long as they could do it, and he's going to continue to suffer. Whenever you're in a moment of just sheer suffering, honestly, you're not thinking about everything else around you. There's no time to strategize. You're thinking about one thing, the very next step. Years ago, I ran a marathon in the Austrian Alps because I'm dumb. And I couldn't read a graph and didn't realize it was going to end uphill. And so, which I've since learned how to read graphs because of that experience. And I remember getting into this marathon. It's the only marathon I've ever run. It's the only marathon I ever will run. If you're a marathon runner, don't approach me after the service. I'm not going to run a marathon with you, okay? I'm only going to do one in my lifetime. I've already done it. After getting about just beyond the halfway point of this marathon, I hit what's known as the wall. Now, those of you who don't know what the wall is not something physical. They don't put a wall in front of you. It is a way of saying you hit your absolute end and it feels like you just can't go on. I had friends call me before the marathon and they were telling me, hey, listen, when you hit the wall or when you reach that moment, it's okay to drop out. We all dropped out of our first marathon. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, no, I'm going to do many things, but I'm not going back to a marathon. So this will be it for me, right? So I hit the wall and I knew I had a ways to go and I was just like, I couldn't believe it. And I felt like years ago they would show the Ironman triathlon on TV. And there was a scene that they would show of a lady at about 2 or 3 a.m. And she would be running and she would like Should we run this way and that way, right? And they would show this footage, and every year you'd be like, oh, the will she has, the power, right? And she was not going to drop. She was not going to go down. And that's exactly how I felt. I probably looked that way too, frankly. I spoke with relatives that have since long passed. I had dreams and visions that probably shouldn't have existed. And in that moment, I'm thinking just one more step. Endurance coaches will tell you that the key to endurance races isn't to think about the whole race. You actually don't think about all of your strategy. You do that ahead of time. But in the moment, really what you think about is that moment. You just think about the next few minutes. And in that moment, your whole world shrinks to you. Survivalists will tell you the same thing. The key to survival is just what's the next step to get you through the day. Jesus should have been doing that. It's just me. Just make it one more step. It's the way of grief. I knew this was coming. I prayed about this in the garden. I remember the blood that came out, and just one more step. One more step. But Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus is fully aware of everything that's happening, and he hears the chanting of these ladies. He hears their mourning for him. And in the middle of all of this, Jesus looks at them and he says, you're mourning the wrong thing. See, you're mourning for me, but you really should be mourning for you. Because as bad as this is, there's still hope in this. But honestly, one day there will be a time when there's not going to be any hope left. See, if you're doing this while the tree is green, while I'm here, while Israel is still promising, while Jerusalem is still thriving, understand there will be a day when Jerusalem will be dried up. And Jesus isn't just speaking historically. I think he's speaking also what we call eschatologically here. He's talking about kind of the end, but he is knowing what is coming. He's fully aware at this moment. And it's interesting. Just a few years later, just a few centuries later, the Romans will actually try to starve the Jews out of Jerusalem. And they'll revert to cannibalism. And that's why Jesus says this, gives us pictures of it's better for a barren woman. Now understand, in Middle Eastern culture, in the ancient world, that was the one thing you didn't say was blessed. There was a social stigma attached if you couldn't bear children. I mean, it was tough, it was painful. In the Bible, it takes great pains to record the answered prayers of those who were barren, and also to say, listen, you don't need to weep. God is here for you, it's okay. But Jesus is saying it's better for them with all of that social stigma than it will be for you if you let the Savior pass you by. Oh, you're mourning for me. Oh, understand that one day the wood will be dry and it'll all get burnt up. And there'll be no opportunity to mourn when that day comes. Jesus is aware. So we're going to take a look at this next passage, and I'm going to ask that David would come up and walk us through this text. David and Melanie teach our bridge class here at Grace Pointe, and we're honored to have him. Won't you give him a warm round of applause?
Hello? Hello? We're good? Awesome. Verse 23 says that two others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And this may seem like a throwaway sentence, but isn't it interesting that Luke, out of all four Gospels, goes out of his way to highlight the fact that Jesus is being crucified with criminals? Now, why? Well, one reason is to reduce Jesus to the status of an ordinary crook. Jesus, although the charge against him was different, and although he was in fact extraordinary and innocent, is being lumped together with people who were considered to be the absolute scum of the earth. The idea was to reduce him to just one face of three, being punished in the most horrible way the Roman government knew how. Have you ever been accused in such a way that lumped you in with everybody else? You know, maybe you've been blamed for something someone else did, or maybe you were a part of a group project where you weren't allowed to really stand out, and if the group got an F, it was just assumed that you were as lazy as the rest of the group, even if you were in fact the hardest worker. When I was 11, we were living in a town called Dornbirn in Austria, and I was the only American in my school. As a matter of fact, we were the only Americans in our village. And like most 11-year-olds, I wanted to fit in, was trying to make friends. And I quickly learned that being an American overseas didn't really help me do that. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't that I was ashamed to be an American, but it gradually started to seem like everything that George Bush did or that America did was immediately put on me by the other Austrians in my school. When America invaded Iraq, I felt like I was getting blamed by my classmates. I was getting yelled at for no reason whatsoever, and teachers were actually approaching me and asking me these really complex geopolitical questions that I had no possible way of answering. I want to re-emphasize for a quick second, I was 11 years old. I was more interested in Harry Potter. I wanted to go to Hogwarts. I didn't know where Iraq was on a map. You know, I wasn't interested in what was going on in the world. I was just trying to figure out what it meant to be the only Christian in my school, or how to study well in a language that wasn't my own, or how to make friends in a tough environment. Have you ever been lumped in with a group or a perception that was just the complete opposite of who you were? Imagine getting blamed for a moment for everything that Obama ever said or did. I can remember desperately trying to justify myself to these people, trying to get them to see that all Americans are in fact different, and it's our capacity to provide a place where that uniqueness can thrive that makes us a great nation. I remember trying to make friends and have them see that I was a person worth breaking this stereotype for, that I was worth getting to know, I was a human being, and just falling short time and time again. Jesus was lumped in with common criminals. He was just one of three. Excuse me. The Romans did everything that they could to reduce his exceptionality. Now, Luke mentions that these are criminals. In Matthew and Mark, they're referred to as robbers. In all likelihood, they were probably petty thieves or revolutionaries, but it's no coincidence that Jesus is being hung between them. That is their design. In doing so, the hope was that by association alone, it did not matter who he truly was. Because he was between them, he somehow deserved that same fate. In verse 38, we read that there was also an inscription over him. This is the King of the Jews. Even the description of his crime is meant as an insult. He's just some would-be king between two thieves. To the Romans, Jesus was dying for political reasons. And these are reasons that even Pontius Pilate in previous chapters found were unsubstantiated. You could not have a king in the land at that time that was not either subject to or appointed by Caesar, nor could you have anyone claim to be a king. Caesar was all. There could not be any question to the authority of the emperor in Rome. To the rulers of Jerusalem, Jesus was dying because he threatened their authority over the people. He was calling out their hypocrisies. He was threatening their system of rule and comfort. And remember, he was an uneducated carpenter from Galilee, unveiling more of the love and power of God to the people than any scribe ever had. And isn't it interesting that for all of their attempts to reduce Jesus' exceptionality, he is still the most exceptional person in the text? Is it possible that when people lump Jesus in as just another God or Christianity as just another religion, that somehow the King of the Jews still manages to rise above the rest? A year before, apologies. The text doesn't stop there though. It says they mocked him, they ridiculed him. And not just some people, everyone from every social strata. The rulers were mocking him, the soldiers were mocking him, the people mocked him. The idea was to make him feel as low as possible and to remind him that even in his suffering on the cross, he was not one of them. A year before we moved to Austria, and I was the only American in my school, I was the only American in a sea of foreigners in Aschaffenburg, Germany. This is a town where my family had been sent to learn the German language and culture. And the idea that the city had was, we're going to put all the foreign children in a school, we're going to teach them the German language, we're going to teach them German culture, and then we'll integrate them into German society. And it's a nice idea, it sounds nice on paper, but in my experience, it didn't really work out that way. It actually made integration much harder. And this year I was turning 10, and I was just desperate for a friend. I've been really friendly to everyone around me. These are children from many different countries. I knew that we were all in the same boat, and I thought that if I was just somehow nice enough to them, that they would want to be my friend. So when my birthday rolled around, I invited about half of my class to come over and celebrate, and the idea was I would use this excuse to get together to launch some friendships. And not a single person showed up. And I remember as a 10-year-old waiting by the window as evening approached, just hoping to see a car or a bicycle pull up for my party. And the next day I had to go back to school. And the same boys and girls that I had invited began to mock me, began to humiliate me because no one had come to my party. And I learned quickly that that was their design. That was no coincidence. They thought it would be fun to humiliate me for reaching out. I don't pretend to know all of what Jesus went through, but I feel like I understand something of what it means to be on the receiving end of intentional mockery. It's a very painful and isolating moment. It hurts. Jesus was being mocked, and those that could have defended him, they didn't. Luke writes that as he was on the cross, the people stood by watching. We're not going to get involved. That would actually cause me to stand out. That might make me uncomfortable. You're not worth that. I'm just going to hang back and watch. If ever there was a moment where God could have torn open the veil and brought down judgment and justice, you would think it would be that moment. But what was Jesus' response? It's right here in verse 34. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That's a beautiful response. It's a response that defies the imagination. It's a response that doesn't excuse what is happening. Remember, some people in the crowd were participating. They knew what they were doing. Some people were ignorant of what they were doing, but everyone was acting in that moment. And Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Everyone isn't suddenly saved. It's a response that extends mercy and forgiveness to them so they can have an opportunity still to follow him. Jesus is asking that the Father look this act over. He not hold this against them and keep them out of heaven because of it, but that he extend them that kind of grace and mercy and hope, even as Jesus is being mocked. Jesus manages to rise above the criminals at his right and left and the crowds that are jeering and remind them that in spite of their sin, God is with them and forgiveness is still available to them. But this should come as no surprise, right? Of course, God is going to use one of the worst moments possible as his crowning glory. What was intended to strip Jesus from his very identity, his personhood, it's actually fulfilling it more than they could have ever realized. He was not only the king of the Jews, but he was the king of the world. He was, in fact, greater than Pilate, greater than the rulers, the temple, than Herod, than even Caesar. Add, of course, that he still is. It's that kind of forgiveness that changes lives. And we're going to hear a little bit more about what that means in just a moment.
So Jesus is hanging on a cross. Two criminals, one on each side, and they're equidistant from Jesus. Both have an opportunity to respond. One criminal joins in with the mocking. It's amazing that this criminal chooses this moment to mock, isn't it? Does this kind of take you by surprise a little bit as well? We kind of expect the Sadducees and the Pharisees to mock. We expect maybe some of the soldiers to mock because they're just kind of crass. Some people in the crowd, okay, but here's a guy literally being hung with Jesus and he's going to mock too. And what does he say? He says, if you're the Christ, come off this cross and save yourself, right? Now, this should remind us of Satan's temptation of Jesus. Remember, Satan's all in this. This is his moment. He's throwing everything he can at Jesus. When Satan was tempting Jesus in the desert, what did he say? If you're God, turn this stone into bread. If you're God, jump off of this building and have the angels catch you. If you're God, right? These are the same things that the crowd is mocking Jesus for. This criminal's going, well, if you're the Christ, save yourself and us. And the irony here is that if Jesus does that, he can't save us. If Jesus chooses to give in to the temptation and to listen to someone else, our hope for salvation is lost. So who is the weaker one here? Who is the stronger one here? In the temptation of Jesus, Satan thought he was strong. He discovered that he was weak. And at this moment on the cross, this thief thinks that he is strong, even as he's being crucified. And what he is discovering is that he is in fact weak and powerless against a king who refuses to give up for our sake. No, I'm not going to save you. That's how strong I am for me to come off this cross. If you want to be saved, you're going to have to follow me. The other thief sees that something's different here. Now think about this with me. Simon of Cyrene gets converted, following behind Jesus. This thief on the cross is about to have a dialogue with Jesus. It's going to result in him becoming a follower of Jesus. Later on in the text, we read that there is a soldier, one of those soldiers who are gambling at the foot of Jesus, who's so struck by Jesus, he begins to follow Jesus too. There are people in this moment, in this text, who are so captivated by Jesus' responses, they actually change their lives. They give themselves up in order to follow him. This particular thief comes into Jesus. He comes into paradise the same way all of us do. He looks at Jesus and he goes, what are you doing? He says this to the other thief. What are you doing? Now, by the way, I think this is kind of cool. If there's one moment in all of this beauty and tragedy that I think, finally someone, this is kind of the moment. When the thief calls out the other thief and he says, you need to shut up because we deserve this. And from everything I can see, everything that I hear, he doesn't deserve this. The guilt is on us. It's not on him. Look at what he's saying. Father, forgive them. Look at what he's doing. Look at what he's done. Jesus, I don't have much. I'm on a cross. In my last dying moments, but here's what I know. I'm guilty and you're not. And would you remember me when you come into paradise? Just something small. Is there some way that maybe I could go where you're going or be with you wherever you are? Jesus, in this moment, does what Jesus has consistently done throughout Scripture. To those who call on my name, I will save. And he says, today, this very moment, you'll be with me in paradise. Now, they weren't suddenly both transported to paradise. Nobody dies, right? But what Jesus is saying is that, listen, when my work is completed, you are with me in heaven. It's an amazing moment of conversion. It's an amazing moment of followership, and it follows the exact same pattern that we see all throughout Luke. Jesus is entirely consistent. He has all of the integrity in this story. If you will leave your boats and follow me, maybe my future is not wrapped up in fish. Maybe it's wrapped up in this man. If you will leave your tax collecting station and follow me, maybe my future is not wrapped up in money. Maybe my future is with this man. If you will humble yourselves, maybe my future isn't just to die the death that I deserve, but maybe my future is with this man. Then today you will be with me in paradise. And that invitation is the invitation he offers to us today. We are all the thief. We are all Simon. It was our mockery. It was our beating. It was our fists. It was us. But understand, for those who look at him and say, I can't do this. My hope is in you. Jesus says, if you give me your life, I'll do something with your life that you could have never dreamt of. The thief knew what was going to happen to him. Suddenly, there's a future he could barely imagine with this man he is being hung next to. That's one of the other things I love about this story. The Romans, in trying to reduce Jesus to just one of two thieves, wind up giving each thief an equal opportunity to follow him. What about you? Some of you are trying to figure out whether to follow him or not. These are the penultimate chapters. It's not the ultimate. The ultimate comes in the resurrection. The resurrection trumps everything. But understand, he offers you the same invitation he offers to them. He has offered consistently all along. And he says, will you choose to humble yourself and follow me? Some of you in this room, the majority of you perhaps, are followers of Jesus. And you're trying to figure it out like I am. How close should it get? How distant should it be? And maybe instead of focusing on how it is in relationship to us, maybe we should focus our response on his response to them. Maybe our hope is found in what he did, what he said, and what he continues to do. And just maybe, for some of us, that focus has somehow gotten back to us. And we got so concerned about our lives that we missed out on the life that he wanted us to have.